All right, let's dive right into AWS Serverless. We're going to break down the two big players here, Lambda and Fargate. You know, if you've ever felt like you're spending more time managing servers than actually writing code, well then this is for you. We're talking about a way to focus purely on building amazing apps. So, let's get into it.
So to really get why this is such a big deal, just look at this contrast. On one side, you've got the old way, a never-ending to-do list, right? Managing servers, provisioning storage, handling OS patches, all that stuff. And then you've got the new, serverless way. What's on your list? Just one thing, write code. That's it. Everything else, it's just handled. That's the revolution we're talking about, and it is a game changer.
Okay, so here's the plan for today. First, we'll nail down what serverless actually means. Then, we'll get into the specifics of Lambda and Fargate. After that, we'll talk about the money, the cost advantages, which are huge. And finally, we'll figure out which one might be the right fit for your next big idea.
All right, first things first. What in the world is serverless anyway? The name can throw you off a bit for sure. But really, what it all boils down to is a massive shift away from all those old headaches of server management.
Yeah, the term serverless is probably the biggest point of confusion. Let's be super clear. Of course there are still servers. There are always servers. The huge difference, the critical difference, is that they're not your problem anymore. AWS handles all of it, the hardware, the scaling, the maintenance, everything. That frees you up to just, well, build.
And this is really the core idea. Your focus completely shifts. Instead of worrying about a whole complex stack of infrastructure, you get to pour all your energy into one thing, the application code itself. Think about all that time and money you get back. You can pump that right back into building cooler features and innovating for your users.
Okay, but how does this actually work in the real world? Let's use an online shopping analogy, because everyone gets that. So you click Place Order on a website. That click, that's an event. Now, instead of poking a server that's just sitting there waiting 24/7, that event triggers a tiny specific piece of code, a Lambda function, to wake up and do its job. It processes the order, updates the inventory, whatever it needs to do, and then poof, it's gone. It shuts down. This whole event-driven thing is just unbelievably efficient.
And that little shopping example, that leads us perfectly into our first major player, AWS Lambda. Think of Lambda as the engine that makes this whole on-demand idea possible, running these little bits of code exactly when they're needed.
I love this quote. A way to run code without needing to worry about the servers at all. I mean, that just nails it, doesn't it? It's really the purest expression of the whole serverless idea. You just bring your code, and AWS takes care of the rest. The execution, the scaling, all of it.
So let's look at what makes Lambda so powerful. First, it's event-driven, just like we saw. Second, the scaling is, well, it's automatic, and it's instant. It can go from one request to a million, just like that, with you doing absolutely nothing. Then there's the cost. You only pay for when your code is actually running, down to the millisecond. And finally, it supports pretty much any popular language you can think of. Python, Node.js, Go, you name it. So your team can just hit the ground running.
Okay, so Lambda sounds awesome for those short, quick-fire tasks. But what if your application needs to run for a long time? Or what if your team is already all in on containers? That's a really good question.
And that brings us perfectly to our next subject, AWS Fargate. Fargate is basically the serverless answer for the container world. It's built to take all the pain out of container orchestration.
So what's the big idea with Fargate? It's pretty simple, really. Just like Lambda takes care of the servers for your code functions, Fargate takes care of the servers and clusters for your containers. You never have to think about provisioning or managing a cluster again.
And this quote, this is basically the developer's dream request, right? Here's my container, run it when needed, scale it if necessary, and don't bother me with the server stuff. I mean, that's it. That's the whole interaction. It's such a powerful change in mindset.
So how does it work? Well, you package up your app into a container, tell Fargate how much CPU and memory it needs, and that's pretty much your job done. Fargate then works with Amazon's container tools, like ECS or EKS, to launch and scale your containers automatically. It's a totally hands-off approach, which is why it's so perfect for things like microservices.
Okay, let's talk about one of the biggest motivators for going serverless, the money. The cost savings can be huge, and it all comes down to a simple principle. You only pay for what you actually use.
Here's a great way to think about it. Using traditional servers is like leaving all the lights on in a giant office building overnight. You're paying for all that electricity even if no one's there. Serverless? It's like you're only paying for the electricity in the exact second that someone flips a light switch on. No usage, no charge. Simple as that.
And with Lambda, this gets ridiculously precise. I mean, we are talking about billing per millisecond. If your function runs for just 50 milliseconds, that is exactly what you pay for. You just can't get any more efficient.
Fargate works on the same basic idea. You stop paying for a whole cluster of servers that are just sitting around waiting. Instead, you're billed for the exact amount of vCPU and memory your containers use, and only for the time they're actually running. Again, zero waste.
So, the big question is serverless your future? How do you decide if it's the right move for your next project? Let's break it down into the key takeaways.
This little table really simplifies the choice. If you're dealing with short, event-driven tasks and you think in terms of individual functions, Lambda is your go-to. But if you have a bigger, long-running application or you're already living in the world of containers, Fargate is probably the better fit. One is functions as a service, the other is containers as a service. That's the easiest way to think about it.
And that really brings us to the final, most important point. I just want to leave you with this one question to think about. Imagine you could take server management and just completely erase it from your to-do list forever. How much faster could you build? How much bigger could you dream? It's definitely something to consider. Thanks so much for tuning in.